I've worked late nights at the office more times than I can count. It's just part of the job, but there's something about being alone in this huge empty building that always gets to me. As soon as everyone else clears out, the atmosphere shifts. The fluorescent lights overhead start to hum and flicker. The air gets thick and stale. There's always some damn sound, a creak in the floor, a groan of the old heating system. It's like the building itself is sighing and settling in for the night. I try to focus on my screen, but my attention keeps shifting. I'll be in the middle of a sentence and suddenly I'm wondering why that's a scratching noise down the hall, or that's a shadowy figure I see at the corner of my eye. I know it's all in my head. I'm not some kid who believes in ghosts, but logic doesn't do much to calm your nerves when you're alone in the dark. Tonight's was worse than usual. Maybe it was the storm rolling in outside. The wind's picking up, making the windows rattle and whine. Or maybe it's just that I'm more tired than normal. Whatever the reason, every little thing is setting me on edge. I just want to get my work done and get the hell out of here, but the words aren't coming to me. My mind keeps wandering back to all the creepy stories you hear about places like this. Offices where people went nuts. Offices where people vanished. I push the thoughts aside and try to bear down, but I can't shake the feeling I'm being watched. Like there's someone standing just out of sight waiting for me. Waiting for me to let my guard down. I spin around in my chair, but there's no one there. Of course, I knew that already. My heart's pounding in my ears. I'm getting spooked over nothing. And that's when I hear the footsteps. At first, I think it's the building settling again, but then they come again. Heavy and deliberate. The kind of thud that a boot heel makes on thin carpet. I'm frozen. My eyes are locked on the dark mouth of the hallway, and I'm waiting for some figure to emerge from the shadows. But then there was only silence. Suddenly, my computer beeps, and I'm just about to jump out of my skin when I realize it's only an email notification, but my nerves are shot. I know I'm not going to get anything else done tonight, so I just shut down my machine and start packing up. I just want to go home. But as I stand up, I hear the footsteps again. Closer this time. My heart's racing. I'm grabbing for my bag, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. I just need to get out of here. I just need to get out of here now. I'm moving for the door when I hear my name. It's just a whisper, but it stops me cold. I'm spinning around, but I'm alone. Of course I'm alone. I'm out there moving down the hallway as fast as I can without running. Fuck that voice. I'm getting out of here. The footsteps are louder now, and they're right behind me. I can feel a breath of cold air on the back of my neck. I'm fumbling for my keys, trying to get the shake of panic off of me. I just need to get into the car. I just need to get in the car and get the hell out of here. I'm through the front door, and I'm running. The rain's coming down in sheets. The thunder's booming overhead, but I barely notice. I'm just focused on reaching my car. I'm fumbling with the keys again, trying to get the door open. My hands are shaking. I'm muttering curses under my breath. I just need to get in. I just need to get in. I just need to get in. I yanked open the door and I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me, and I locked it. I'm leaning back and I let out a shaky breath. I'm safe. I'm safe now. I'm just going to sit here for a minute and catch my breath, and then I'm going to get the hell out of here. As I sit there, I start to feel a little bit better. The rain's letting up and my heart's slowing down. I'm telling myself I just got spooked. I'm telling myself that it was all in my head. It was just working those late nights, starting to get to me. But as soon as I reach for the ignition, I catch a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. It's a shadowy figure, hunched down in the back seat. Even as I spin around, I know I'm not alone in the car. I'm screaming, fumbling for the door handle, and then I look up again and the shadowy figure was gone. I know how all of this sounds, but I truly believe I saw a ghost or something more sinister. I later found out one of my coworkers had overdosed in a bathroom a year ago. I'm not saying it's related, but it's funny how it ends up that way. Anyway, after that, I made sure to leave when the sun came up. I didn't wish to meet this ghost of mine again. Working at a restaurant was never on my bucket list of things to do. I had worked at the same diner for the last 3 years to pay for college. It had its ups, it had its downs, especially since it was 24 hours and occasionally I had to work the overnight shift. It was usually just one, maybe two people in the building at this time of night, usually no manager, but this time was different. My heart sank as I pulled into the parking lot. Only one other car sat dimly in the expanse, the engine still ticking as it cooled. My manager's car. Great. Just what I wanted. Overtime with, well, we'll call him Jack, breathing down my neck. The diner was always slow on weeknights, but tonight it was dead. Just a handful of stragglers nursing lukewarm coffee until we kicked them out. I clocked in, the bell above the door jingling mournfully as I stepped inside. Jack was already in the back, the sizzle of the grill accompanying the mumbled drone of the radio. I tied on my apron, the polyester stiff with dried ketchup. It must have been much more busy earlier in the night. The hours dragged on like it was days, but no customers in the building and the restaurant mostly clean. It was like watching paint dry. I never understood why we stayed open when the sun went down. Who eats breakfast in a diner in the middle of the night sober? And then, that's when I saw her. The bell at the door had jingled and I came sauntering out to the floor. A girl, sitting in the back booth staring at me with these empty eyes. She was maybe 18. My heart lurched. She seemed dead on the inside, far more than a burned-out college student, but as I stared, she vanished. This is the part where people stop believing me, but I don't care. I know what I saw. I spun around, the diner was empty, just me and Jack in the back. The only sound of the crackle of the fryer and the soft hum of the fridges up front. I must have imagined it. Too much coffee, not enough sleep, but I knew deep down that wasn't true. But as the night wore on, I started to feel a presence, like someone was watching me. I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned, there was no one there. The diner creaked, groaned around me, the old building settling in for the night, but it sounded different now. It sounded like whispers. My paranoia catching up with me, I guess. My skin crawled as I restocked the ketchup bottles, my hands shaking slightly from the anxiety. I glanced at the clock, only half an hour, and it might as well have been days. That's when the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to make me jump. The neon sign outside cast an eerie glow over everything, making my skin look sallow. Jack muttered something in the back, the words indistinguishable over the crackle of the fryer. And then suddenly the radio in the back died. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the steady hum of the neon sign. I exchanged a nervous glance with Jack, his face more irritated. He mumbled something about old wiring and how he needed to talk to the landlord about it or whatever. And then I saw the girl again. She was just outside the restaurant, standing at the front door with those cold, dead eyes staring in at me. There was another flicker of the lights in the restaurant and she disappeared. The radio came back on and all seemed to return to normal. When I left work, I caught a news report about missing girls' bodies being found. She had been missing for nearly 3 days, the girl that I saw, and her body was found buried with the others. Well, I think you already guessed it. They were buried nearby the diner in the woods. The person that did it still hasn't been found, but I will forever remember that girl's face. I wanted to quit. I wanted to never step foot in that building again. But unfortunately, I needed the money. However, though, I never worked an overnight shift again. The mall was always deserted late at night. The only sound was the echo of my footsteps off the tile. I liked it that way. Less chance of running into anyone. I worked at a niche store at the mall. Usually I didn't get off until late. I often wasted time when locking up by fiddling with my phone or something. Security in this place was kind of a joke. The cameras were old, and so were the guards. The old guy spent more time hitting on girls at the makeup counter than actually securing anything. I've seen kids sneaking in after hours, looking for a place to party. Never seemed to catch any, though. But tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't alone. I had been working late. I lost track of time, but by the time I packed up and headed out, the mall was already closed. No big deal. I've done it before. The employee entrance stayed unlocked until midnight. But as I cut through the food court, I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man I originally thought was a fellow employee sitting in the food court, but he had on a hood and he was regular build, not some hulking monster out of my nightmares. I turned to head down the stairs towards the employee exit when the footsteps started to echo behind me. Heavy and deliberate. Not the guard. He had a shuffle, like the ones where his hip was loose. These were desperate and hungry. My heart started to pound. I picked up my pace and told myself I was being paranoid, but the footsteps kept pace with mine. I ducked into the Sears, hoping to lose myself in the racks. I felt really silly at first, but they followed. My skin crawled as I realized I was trapped. There was no way out but the way I came in. And that's when I saw him, the same man. He was standing by the tools watching me. He was more huge in this instance. Maybe it's because I was scared. Maybe because I was terrified. His face twisted by a scar above his eyebrow. I'd never seen him before, and something about this guy seemed really off. He didn't move, he just kept staring. I felt a malevolence rolling off of him, like heat off of asphalt. My instincts screamed at me to run. I didn't. I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. Slowly, he started towards me. His movements were stiff like an old man, but there was nothing slow about the way my heart was racing. I tried to scream, but it came out as a whisper. I really hated my anxiety. He kept coming. My eyes darted around, desperate for an escape, but there was none. I was trapped. That's when adrenaline took over, and I bolted out of the store. But then, a flash of light, then blackness. When I came to, I was lying on the floor. My head was throbbing, but the mall was silent. The only sound, the steady hum of the fluorescent lights. Slowly, I stood up. My heart was still racing a little. He was gone, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could still feel the fear. I could still taste the adrenaline. I had a hard lump on my head that ached, and it was then I realized that I had slipped on the freshly cleaned floors and smacked my head on the floor. But that doesn't explain who the man was or where he went. But the better question is, why was I left on the floor by security? Turns out the cameras over where this happened didn't work. The man had come through the employee exit that was left propped open. Somebody went on a smoke break and forgot to close it. I never went back to that mall. I quit 3 days later and never found out who he was after I reported the incident to mall management, or if he was just a product of my imagination. But I know what I felt, and I know this. I'll never be alone in a deserted place again without wondering, am I really alone? I was asleep during a rainstorm, and sometimes I wish I wasn't a light sleeper. I didn't even hear the window break downstairs, but the lightning sure woke me up. The rain hammered against the roof, a relentless rhythm that echoed through the pounding in my chest. I huddled deeper in the shadows, my breath fogging the cool air. Below me, the house creaked and groaned, the sound of the intruder's movements amplified in the silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird struggling to escape. This wasn't supposed to happen. My husband, Mark, was supposed to be home by now. He had promised, but the storm had come in with a vengeance, a sudden fury of wind and rain that had grounded flights and delayed trains. He was stuck somewhere miles away while I was trapped here, a sitting duck in my own home. The intruder was methodical, his steps slow and purposeful as he moved through the house. I listened, my senses heightened, every creak and groan sending chills down my spine. He moved to the living room, the sound of furniture scraping against the floor sending a tremor through me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and text from Mark, stuck at the airport, flight delayed indefinitely. Don't go out and pick me up. I'll be home as soon as possible. We'll take a taxi. The words were a cold comfort, but I pressed my back against the wall after I got out of bed, my hand hovering near the old baseball bat that lay hidden in a corner. I never thought I'd need it, but now I felt like it was my only hope. The thud of a heavy object hitting the floor sent a jolt through me. It sounded like a lamp smashing to pieces. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to get out of the house, but my anxiety trapped me like a sleep paralysis demon holding me down. The footsteps moved closer, the sound of them echoing through the empty house, my heart pounding in my chest again. A frantic rhythm grew in the growing silence. Then the door creaked open, slow and deliberate. The intruder had ascended the stairs. My hand tightened around the bat handle. The steps drew closer, the sound of each creaking wood echoing in my bedroom. I held my breath, my body tense, waiting for him to appear. The air grew heavy and thick with the smell of damp wood and dust. A shadow fell across the bedroom floor, stretching long and menacing. I squinted, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness.
The intruder was in the doorway, his face obscured by the shadows. He wore a dark hooded jacket, his features hidden behind the fabric. "Who's there?" I rasped, my voice trembling. The intruder didn't answer, he just stood there, silent and unmoving, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. My hand tightened on the bat handle, my knuckles turning white. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe he wanted money, maybe he wanted something else. But I knew one thing, I wouldn't get out of here without a fight. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by a chilling silence. It seems that something had fallen over in his movements. The intruder froze, his head turning towards the sound, and I saw my opportunity. I swung the bat, my arm a blur of motion. The weapon met its target with a dull thud, the sound muffled by the darkness and the sounds of a distant rainstorm. I didn't wait to see the result. I scrambled down my stairs, my heart hammering in my chest, and I ran through my house, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only run. I had to get out of there. I burst through the front door and into the night. The rain was still falling, but now felt like a blessing, washing away the fear and the adrenaline. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest. I didn't stop until I reached a nearby park, the familiar shadows of trees offering a semblance of safety. I collapsed onto the grass, my body trembling uncontrollably. I had survived, but the experience had left me shaking. A terrifying echo of the intruder's presence lingering in my mind. The darkness seemed deeper, but the silence was more oppressive. I knew I wouldn't be able to stay here for long, not for long at all. I had to get somewhere safe to call the police, to the safety of a neighbor's house. When I got there, I did call the police, but by the time they got there, the man had woken up. He apparently was a serial home invader and was moving through the area. Despite the broken windows and lamps, it turned out a lot better than it could have. When Mark arrived home, he was angry with himself, but he shouldn't be. I'm just glad I made it through the night. My home invader, let's meet again. I want to hit another home run. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me, though. It made my house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anybody nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just gotten off of a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I was pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later when I heard noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by and use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone going off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out it was 9-something, but couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. This house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my home thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. It gave me enough time to open the attic access to the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in the room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in the corner, some weights and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was about their knee high. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn out work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs, and I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the furniture had flipped my bed over. I assumed in an attempt to find me. There was a loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I expected that. The chairs had been knocked over and the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found out the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found cigarette butts all along my fence line with some foil and an empty pen tube, which police said was often used to smoke meth. So they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me that I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I had the door fixed and the motion lights installed on the back sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there again without a phone. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I don't even want to think about what would have happened had I not been fast enough to get from my bed to the attic. So this happened in 2013 and I was 17. My family was looking at this house and the owner had showed up, talked to my parents. Seemed like a nice older man, built the house himself. It was pretty nice, 2-story house overlooking a river. Anyway, I was standing back watching everyone talk, and as the owner is talking and laughing, there's a break in the conversation where he turns away from my parents. His expression completely and instantly changes from happy to the most sinister and hateful scowl I've ever seen. I didn't think he noticed me watching. It probably appeared to be on my phone as my head was down. As soon as he turned back, he instantly went back to smiling. It was just so creepy and honestly made me feel sick. I told my mom, who said it was weird, but maybe he's just awkward. When we got to the house, we moved in the next weekend. My family was going to church and I didn't feel like going, so they'd all left me at home. So it's Sunday morning at about 11 a.m. and I hear a really loud banging outside. It's rhythmic and it's coming from the side of the house. I was on the other side of the house on the second floor. Honestly, my dumbass thought it maybe was the wind. It was stormy that day, and I didn't think much of it. It stopped after about 5 minutes. Then 10 minutes later, I hear walking around downstairs, chairs moving, kitchen cabinets opening, and the fridge opening. I immediately quietly lock my door, grab my baseball bat, and call 911. When I tell them my address, I text my mom and tell her that someone is in the house and that I've called 911. At that point, the 911 operator said that someone was 10 minutes out. I tell her I could hear footsteps walking around the stairs. Basically, the house was so thin I could track where he was. At this time, my mom responded that she's on her way. She's 30 minutes away, so here's a 17-year-old, 5'2", 100-pound girl hunkered in a room, knowing full well that if he came in, he'd overpower me and take the bat. I was terrified. I heard him walk around the hallway towards my door. I saw the handle turn and stop. It was locked. and I heard him stand there. He didn't move. I could hear his breathing. It felt like forever, but really, it was about 10 seconds. I heard him turn and go back downstairs. I heard the back door open and shut. After about 3 minutes, the police pulled up. The 911 operator asked me if I could let them in or if they needed to force it. I knew he had left, so I let them in. No one was there. No sign of forced entry. Nothing. When my mom got there, she looked at my stepdad and asked if he had changed the locks. He hadn't. I think the creepiest part and what really validated my story was that my mom had just vacuumed the hallway and there were shoe prints that were larger than anyone in our house. And the police hadn't been up there. They just stopped outside my room. He died a year after that. Please don't forget to change your locks.
Quarantine was a crazy time for our country. I've never felt so isolated in my entire life, but I often enjoyed the silence. I used the time to play video games or catch up on TV shows that I missed. In the case of this story, I was playing games in the empty house. I was alone upstairs in my room one night when it happened. I had my headset on so I didn't hear the noises from downstairs, but I thought I heard something. So I took off my headset and listened a little closer. I guess it was nothing. I resumed playing the game for a while, and it must have been an hour or so when I heard something again, but only louder. I realized it was a banging noise, the repeated clanking echoing through the halls, but was faint enough to sound minimal upstairs. I decided to check it out. It might have been the snowfall outside had knocked over a branch and it was poking at the side of my house. I couldn't have been more wrong. Instead, I realized the noise was coming from my back door. It was wide open. The wind had been whipping the screen door outside the main back door back and forth in a chaotic rhythm. The snow fell from the top of the wood into the open doorway in the back to make a small pile of snow on the kitchen floor. Did I accidentally leave the door open? When I went to close it, I noticed footprints in the snow just outside my door. A cold chill went down my spine, and not a day goes by that I don't remember that feeling. The sight of those prints made me look around my kitchen a little more strongly. I noticed drawers were pulled open, and some of my dishes I had washed from the previous day were slightly knocked over. I followed the trail of snow leading from the back door to a nearby closet. It was a French door-style closet with panels you could see through. I looked a little closely and I saw somebody's eyes looking back at me. I wanted to scream, but perhaps he didn't notice that I noticed. So I calmly walked towards the front door as if checking everything else. When I reached the front door, I heard the closet door slam open. I didn't look back. I bolted towards the street and got in my car. Thankfully, it was push to start and I always kept a key fob in the middle console when I knew I would be home. I often lost mine, and I peeled out of the driveway, feeling my car skid backwards before driving away quickly. I sped down the street, and when I got to a safe distance, I called the police. They searched, but they didn't find anyone. I decided after that day if I was going to be stuck at home, then I needed to invest in better locks and cameras at my front and my back door. Quarantine was already wild for everyone. Well, at least without people trying to kill me in my own home. Since I was about 5 or 6 years old, I've dealt with sleep paralysis. It's not something that happens on a regular basis, but it does happen a few times a year. I'm going to give some background information before I continue. At my childhood home, my brother, sisters, and I have had many instances where we felt there was a presence in our home. We found stories in the back of our home with words carved into them, but the stones were too broken up with pieces missing to make anything legible. Our family got rid of them quickly after our elderly neighbor, whose children previously inhabited the house, did not know where they came from. We felt that they were being watched, heard our names called, and we've seen doors open and close on their own when the AC and heater were off and while the windows were closed. I can share other stories with everyone if you want this one, but honestly, this one is more personal. The story I'm going to share about my problems with sleep paralysis is from when I was 5. One night, I fell asleep around 8 p.m. and I began to have a weird dream. I dreamt of this small girl who's had the body of someone who had been burned but not charred. I distinctly remember that her body seemed like it was a bright red pink, the same color of new skin after you peel a scab. This girl's hands looked like the goblin's hands. For some reason, this girl had been brought into my family home, and my parents in my dream were behaving as if this was something normal. My dream went on for several days, but this girl would not leave. I was scared that she was going to hurt me and my family. I could not understand why she wouldn't leave me alone. On the last dream day, I remember a fire. Everything was on fire. My family behaved as if it was normal. I felt like I was going to burn to death. I felt like I would never wake up. At this time, I told myself that I was not awake, and the past few days were only a dream because I didn't want them to be real. I started crying in my dream, but my family just laughed. When I woke up, my fingers would not let go. Not from the sheets, not from anything, just paralyzed. I couldn't move my entire body except for my eyes. I kept trying to move, but nothing worked. I started trying to scream, but all I could make was the tiniest little muffled noise. My eyes frantically went around the room and I saw the shadow moving around me. I started trying to see some more, and at this point I sounded like a teapot that reached so high a note you could hear was just the air being released. I was in a room next to my oldest sister and across from my parents' room, and I thought that if I could get their attention, the shadow would leave me alone. I kept trying to scream and move, and the shadow kept shuffling around my room, seemingly ignoring me. After what felt like 5 minutes of trying to move and scream, and only making the noise of air rushing out, the shadow turned to me. It was at this moment I began thrashing about, or at least, I thought I was. My body stayed still, but in my mind I was thrashing around. I couldn't tell if I was completely awake or still asleep. The shadow began to move towards me when my sister in the next room turned on the hallway light and opened the door to my room. She could see the tears in my eyes, and I felt like my body had been released from the torture I'd been facing. I began to cry really loudly, and I was finally able to sit up. My oldest sister began to comfort me and brought me to her room to sleep with her. She began to sing to me and help me get back to sleep. And when I dozed off, I picked right back up where my dream left off, which caused me to panic and move, which woke me up. My sister was still awake and stayed up with me for the rest of the night. That was the first time I've ever experienced sleep paralysis, and I've dealt with it since. It's never been as bad as that, but now when I wake up with sleep paralysis, I can only move for a split second before I realize that I'm awake and my body goes stiff. I usually look to the corner of my room and the shadowy figure is still there. I've learned to teach myself tricks to keep myself awake and get myself to wake up, to free myself from this misery. I think to myself, if I can curl the tips of my fingers or slightly move my leg, then I can break the sleep paralysis. But it only works about 1/5 of the time, and I've never had sleep paralysis for more than 2-3 days at a time. I moved out of the country for 2 years, and I didn't have sleep paralysis while I was gone. When I came back and stayed in my childhood home for a year before starting college, it happened once. Since I moved out to college, I've only dealt with it once or twice, but it hasn't happened anywhere near as frequent as I live in my childhood home. I wonder what was going on in that house. I've always been a sound sleeper, the kind that can doze off anywhere, anytime, except in the dark. It's been a curse rather than a blessing. It started a few weeks ago. I'd wake up in the dead of night for no reason. At first I brushed it off as your run-of-the-mill weird dream, but it kept happening, night after night. I'd be snapped awake for no reason at all in my dark room, unable to fall back asleep for hours. The first few times was just a vague sense of dread that filled me, my heart racing, but there was never anything there. No shadowy figure looming over me, no spectral voice whispering in my ear, just me, alone in the dark, frozen, in fear. But then, things took a turn. I started seeing things, a dark shape huddled in the corner of my room. It was always just out of the corner of my eye, and gone when I looked straight at it. I told myself it was just my brain playing tricks, but it was always there, night after night, the shadow in the corner. See, here's the thing. I've always had a thing about the dark. Not a full-blown phobia or anything, and I've never really had sleep paralysis, but I've never been a fan of being alone in the dark. Lately, because of my sleep experiences, that dislike has turned into outright terror. The daytime has started to be affected as well. It started with little things. I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look, there'd be nobody there. At first I wrote it off as my imagination running wild, but then I started seeing them during the day. Much like at night. Who are they, you may ask? They're just shadows, dark shapes that seem to move on their own accord. I'd be sitting on the couch watching TV, and I'd see one dart across the room, or I'd be lying in bed and catch a glimpse of one flitting past my door. And then there's the one in the corner. They're always just out of sight, at the corner of my eye, gone when I try to look straight at them. At first I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, the house settling or my eyes playing tricks on me, but I can't shake the feeling that these shadows are something more. They feel heavy somehow, like they've got weight and presence. The worst part is, I see them when I'm not alone. I'll be out with friends at a restaurant or a movie and I'll see one of the shadows flit past. No one else seems to notice, but it makes my skin crawl. I've tried to brush it off to pretend it's not happening, but the shadows are always there, lurking just out of sight. I feel like I'm being watched, constantly, and I have no idea what these things want or what they're waiting for. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know much more of this I can take. I'm exhausted, constantly looking over my shoulder. I feel like I'm losing my mind, and I have no idea how to make it stop. Is my brain eating itself? Do I need to seek help? I don't know at this point, but I need to sleep soon. I've gotten new sleep medication to help, but I'm not sure it will. So long, and good night. May I wake up safe, or may I wake up at all.
This happened when I was in high school. I won't say where for my identity's sake, or in case the person in question finds me. Even though this was a very long time ago. Call me paranoid, but this is just how I work. This was before every high schooler known to man had their own cell phone, so when I was too sick to go to school, I had to rely on the good old landline. At first, everything was just fine. I was sitting on the couch, watching TV when the phone started to ring. The rain outside almost made me miss it, so I ignored it at first, but yet it was still the early morning. My mom wouldn't have gotten to work yet. But it kept ringing, so I got up to get the phone. When I answered, nothing. When I looked at the caller ID, it was labeled as unknown. Strange. I had never seen that happen before. I hung up the phone and returned to watching my cartoons. Yes, even as a teenager, I still watched cartoons. But then 5 minutes later, they called again. No answer or reply. This happened about 3 more times and I was beginning to panic. So I decided to call my mom and let her know what was happening, but she didn't pick up. Frustrated, I decided that maybe I would unplug the landline for now and maybe wait a while. But the idea of getting in trouble with my parents over it got the best of me. In hindsight, this was a really stupid decision. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I picked it up with a more angry response, but this time a whispering voice spoke to me over the phone.
I know you're alone.
I screamed and hung up the phone, unplugging it from the wall before curling up on the couch. I did this for about 20 minutes before I heard a loud knock on my front door. It wasn't a friendly knock either, it was loud. It was angry, with each pound on the wood of my door.
I know you're in there. Why don't you come open the door for me? Come on. I know you're alone in there.
It was clear he was using the intercom at the front of my door. I hated these old school houses sometimes, thinking back on it. I ran to my room and locked the door, hiding away as I heard the knocking continue. I didn't know what to do at this stage except hide. I hid for what felt like hours. Eventually, the knocking stopped and I heard the phone ring again. I was afraid to pick it up, but I braved the frightening walk back to the living room to pick up the phone and answer. With a breath of relief, it was my mom. I explained what had happened, and of course she said I was being paranoid. Maybe I was half asleep and imagined it. Back then, things like that didn't happen, so of course she didn't believe me. I never experienced anything after that, and I wasn't sure who it was or what they wanted, but it couldn't have been good. My mysterious caller, if you're out there, please, let's never talk again. There is no doubt that we are in somewhat peculiar situation these days. Quarantines, full isolation, and generally strict calls to stay at home. These have become our new everyday life. The streets are empty. Public transport runs almost empty carriages, and what is left is a purely visual society devoid of people. Unfortunately, people with dubious intentions can use this to their advantage. At midnight yesterday, I was on my way home, alone. As I get on the bus and sit down, I almost immediately register a man on the other side of where I am sitting. He took a keen interest in me. Very clear interest. He fixes his gaze firmly on me, almost the entire way. I gradually start to get a little uncomfortable, and a couple of occasions allow myself to let my eyes wander accidentally across the bus to confirm to myself that I am indeed being watched. Which I keep getting confirmed as he refuses to take his eyes off me. Not only does his behavior worry me at this point, but also his appearance in general, where he sits wearing a large outer jacket with the hood pulled out well over his head, with a clear focus on hiding the lower part of his face with the help of the neck of his jacket. It was similar to the function of a finish cap. Back was only the sight of two big, dark, intense eyes that wouldn't leave me alone. When we get to the point where I have to change from bus to subway, he follows. I make a few random small stops here and there to check departures, with the intention of watching his movements, of which he stops. I expected this. He then follows me down onto the platform, where he clearly stands and watches me from a distance. I'm now waiting for the train, and I'm beginning to feel the fear that he will follow me all the way to the end station of where I'm going to get off. The train line tune arrives, and I am currently alone, and I decide to get on one of the carriages to give the impression that I'm going that way, then get off again before the doors close for departure. Both to mislead the man, but also get confirmed to myself that he is indeed after me. That it's just not me being paranoid. Once again, suspicion is confirmed. He gets into the carriage, but when he turns around and sees that I've got off again, he also gets off and stands back on the platform. Now, my anxiety is really starting to kick in. Finally, the line 4 arrives, and I stand a bit waiting before I go in. Then strategically slip in the second the doors close. He does the same. I then sit down in the front seat in the front carriage with my back to the cab. This is to make sure he has no opportunity to move behind me where I sit with a full view of the entire carriage. Unsurprisingly, he walks towards me and sits in the seats directly in front of me. He leans back with his arm resting over the backs of his seats and fixes his gaze upon me, occasionally interrupted by him standing up and pacing a little relentlessly back and forth, then to sit down again. I feel my heart pounding away, and that my breathing was becoming harder to keep in check. Nevertheless, I try my best to appear unaffected by it all, as I don't want him to see that I'm scared. But at the same time, it's becoming more and more challenging for me to keep a cool head and think clearly. A little beyond us sits another slightly younger guy. I hope, with everything that I am, that he will be with the train all the way to the terminus, so that I have to get off alone with the man who follows me and can ask to be accompanied home. There are now only 3 of us left on the track, and as I feared at most at this point, the other guy is starting to get ready to get off at the next stop, 2 stops before mine. Now the adrenaline really kicks in, and I realize I should act fast, as after I have no idea what this mildly questionable man's intentions really are. It ends with me sitting completely still in the seat, and then jumping up and sprinting out of the carriage onto the station, just as the doors close. Taking a quick glance back behind me as I run away, I see that this man is clearly also in a hurry to get off, but luckily, he doesn't have time before the train moves on. From here, I then run the whole distance home, in fear of meeting him on the way, as there are short distances between the last 2 stops. And here, obviously, the adrenaline did me a big favor, since my fitness these days is as absent as the toilet paper on the store shelves. Luckily, I made it home safely, albeit somewhat emotionally frayed. I quickly agree with myself that I will never again go out alone in the evening these days. And I give that notion out to every girl, or even every person out there. If you are ever isolated on public transport, stay frosty and watch out for yourself. You never know what the person sitting across from you has intentions to do. I lived in this small apartment for most of my adult life, but this story in question was made far more scary due to quarantine. You see, I'm amazed that there are not more stories about quarantine, the time where we all had to be locked up and alone.
but here is mine. My apartment complex was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by fields and a main road that led all the way to the nearby city. During lockdown, considering I live alone, I often got bored of the same video games and movie marathons that took up most of my lockdown time. So I decided to take a walk through the fields around my complex. It was pretty nice most times, but one night, it ruined my nightly ritual forever. One night, my neighbors were having a party next door. Being a little frustrated by the noise, I decided to take a walk through the fields to clear my head. Everything was going fine until I heard the sound of grass crunching behind me. I turned around and saw nothing, so I attributed it to just being some animal or something echoing down the field. But then, I kept hearing it. It sounded like it was getting closer, so I decided to stop and take a look. When I did, my dog came through the clearing. Odd. I thought I locked my door. "Come on, boy," I whistled, but he didn't come. He usually followed me, and he continued to do so I kept walking. I moved through the field with my dog until I saw my apartment come through the clearing. But then a chill ran down my spine when I saw my dog looking down at me through the window of my upstairs apartment. I froze and slowly turned around to see the dog behind me. Now that I looked at it, something seemed very off with it. I couldn't help but feel a sense of panic running down my spine. It was keeping me from moving until I snapped out of it and broke into a sprint. My neighbors were partying outside, must have thought I was a mad person or something, especially when I yanked open my apartment door and slammed it behind me. After dry heaving in a panic for about 3 minutes, I looked out my window to see the dog staring up at my apartment. My own dog started growling while he looked out the window with me at this mysterious creature as it disappeared into the fields. I don't know what it was, or what was going to happen if I led it back to my apartment. What I do know is that I never went walking alone in the fields again. It later got suggested to me that it might have been a skinwalker of some kind, but I try not to give stock into myths. But myths gotta start somehow. Or maybe the isolation was driving me mad. But every now and again I hear a dog barking in the distance from those fields.
Most people would think that being alone on a distant cosmic body would be peaceful. Being away from the trials and tribulations of Earth, everyday society, or being able to truly see the stars without any light pollution. Most would see it as true escapism, especially now, but I'm here to tell you that even though it truly is that at first, but often things are not what they seem. I live alone on the moon. While I may not be far away from Earth, I am far enough away that what happened to me could not be helped. I got this job because I had no attachments back on Earth. My wife she had just died. A young marriage with no kids, and I really had no debt to speak of. I was a nobody with a degree in engineering. I was approached with an encrypted memo about an opportunity to live rent-free on the moon. I thought it was a joke, but given I currently live here, it wasn't. I was told the job was pretty simple. I could not tell anybody I was there. I could tell nobody that they had already assembled a base on the moon itself. The job duty was one simple task: watch a monitor. The monitor in question was a 60-inch screen on the back of my small moon abode. It had some code and whatnot strewn about, but I was told that what I needed to do was ensure that it never said stasis interrupted. I was told that it may never do it, but if it did, I was to alert NASA and get in my evacuation pod. What is this stasis, you might ask? What is in there? Well, I asked the same thing. You see, my moon abode was attached to another module drilled into the ground. Above that drilled module was a housing building no bigger than my own. I had no access to it, and I had no idea what was inside of it. The only thing that I know was that it was found somewhere else on the moon and brought to this specific area. Whatever it was, I wasn't paid to ask questions. I just had to live my day-to-day, get paid to do essentially nothing. I was contracted for 10 years. And when those 10 years were up, I had made enough income to retire at the young age of 40. So, of course, I said yes. But looking back, I may have been thinking with my grief and not my brain. I was shot to the moon one day, and the endless valleys of moon dust and the darkness of space was my new Yellowstone Park. Just one rather small building for me to live in, and a smaller building nearby that I had to keep an eye on. Simple. They wanted a diary of sorts every year at the beginning and the end of that period, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, of course. If nobody called after, I was in the clear. If I showed signs of, well, something else, a therapist would call me to work it out and offer a solution. After all, it's not like I could just get up and leave.
Diary 1. Arrival. Good morning, Earthlings. That's right, I can say that with my full chest. Well, all I have to say is things here on the great moon above are, well, they're great. I have no lawn to mow. I have no work to go to apart from looking at the big old monitor right here behind me. I mean, I have really nothing to complain about. You know, I brought my golf clubs with me, right? Okay, just hear me out. I bet you I could hit a ball all the way across the moon. Not in a full circle, but at least to the dark side of the moon that I couldn't get to. Other than that, there's no sun for a lot of the times because I'm locked inside of this capsule here. But when I do go walking out there, I can see it. It's not perpetual darkness. Sometimes I do miss my neighborhood, but I don't miss my neighbor with that stupid dog of hers. Janine, if you see this, I hate your dog. Okay, I'm glad I don't have to see that little thing. It's not even really a dog, cause it could fit in a blender. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Uh, Apart from everything being great here, there's no mechanical failures. There's no alarms going off. So, for a first year here on the great moon above, well, things are going pretty good. Nothing to complain about. Nothing to well, I do miss people sometimes. You know, trying to get things together in my mind about never really seeing another person for the next 10 years is it's a hard thing to swallow, but I think I can manage. I was never really too much of a people person before I left, but any hoodles, I am going to get to that golfing thing. So I will, I guess, speak to you next year. Bye bye.
The first year went off without a hitch. I did indeed play golf on the moon. My drive had actually gotten pretty good. There were moments of deep thought, but the idea of living in space far outshone my own insignificant problems or my grief. I often spent my days keeping busy. I would wake up in the early morning. Well, morning for me. Without a day or night cycle, I had to rely on the computer system to remind me it was morning. When I woke up early, I started off with a simple breakfast and I would go jogging. I would throw on my suit and laugh as I jogged with high jumps from the lower gravity. I often ended my nights with dinner and a movie. I had an impressive collection to choose from, which was often updated by NASA. Thankfully, I wasn't stuck watching the same Tom Hanks marathon every week. But as the second year rolled in, a sense of loneliness started to come over. I kept dreaming of my wife. I'm not sure why I could go a year without, but the loneliness was like a plague for me. Or at least, it was starting to be.
Diary entry for year 2. Hey there, Earthlings. This is my year 2 diary. I'm here to give you some updates of what's going on up here. Um, nothing's going wrong. I can tell you that, apart from not really getting much sleep. I, well, I dreamt of my wife, for the last couple months. Just random scatterings of distant memories or seeing her face in my sleep. I don't know. I'm was having a little bit of trouble with it. Apart from thinking about what happened in those last few months. Well, let's let's not get into that. But still no stasis interrupted. I well, it's easy, but it's also very hard up here. Um, I'm trying to think positive. I got, I'm still working out, still keeping busy. I'm really looking forward to, finding a new hobby. Uh, I was thinking of space vegetation, like in that Matt Damon movie. I know it's not possible, and I'm not a botanist. I'm an engineer, so I might actually break out the Legos and finally start getting into that. Well, anyway, well, I guess I will talk to you next year, Earthlings. I will see you then.
I admit that it was more of a downer entry, and not a day later, my therapist contacted me. Great. I often wished my diaries were private and kept to myself, but I guess there were some caveats to living on NASA's dime on a distant moon base.
Year 2 therapist conversation.
Your last diary entry was a wee bit concerning for us. I'm here to talk to you about that. How are you feeling?
Honestly, it was just a momentary lapse of um, admission. Some things you should keep to yourself.
There's nothing wrong with feeling this way, especially being without social contact for so long. It's all right to really reach out and talk about these things. What you're feeling is normal.
No, I mean, you're right. It's just, um, listen, I'm really okay. There's really nothing to worry about. I'm just, I'm trying to do this job and also put the pieces of my mind back together. You know, I'm uh I'm really trying to get through it and well, honestly, there's nothing to worry about. Everything's great. It really is. It's just, it's just the dreams of her face and the last months we spent together, but you already know all about that, but I I'm I'm okay. I promise.
Brief is a hard thing, but if you ever feel this way again, you know how to reach me, all right? All right. I will check in with you later.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Um Thank you. I will do just that.
A month passed on without incident. The sleep didn't get much better, but my productivity ended up getting more priority from me. I built a Lego Death Star that I had intended to put together for quite some time now. I spent all the money on the set, and yet all I could do was just look at it from afar. I often found myself doing the very same thing to the building next to me. Its windowless secrets called to me, but my self-control kept me from looking deeper into it. I often found myself walking circles around it when I was out for my morning jogs. There was nothing coming from it, only the feeling of vibrations on the surface, as if machinery was inside of it. The curiosity would probably get the better of me in the coming years, but at that point I didn't dare step over that boundary. But then a sneaky little thought started to creep into my brain. If I did peek inside, what could they do? Send me to space jail? I walked away from it this last time. The thought creeping into my mind again and lingering. I knew I wasn't going to. My entire life I was always thought of myself in a more grandeur, but in the end I just kept my head down and went about my day to day. You could have honestly walked right by me and you would have never noticed me.
Year 3 diary. It's year 3, Earthlings. If you can look here, I built the Lego Death Star that I brought with me from Earth. I bought it actually about, I don't know, 5 years ago, and yeah, I just never put it together, even though I love putting things together. The sleep hasn't really gotten much better. The dreams haven't gotten much better, but I'm staying active. I'm doing a lot more productive stuff instead of just sitting here and wallowing in my own grief and loneliness. I guess I'm taking the advice of my therapist and trying to stay busy, even though there's not too much to do other than watch movies and.
What the hell? The knocking sent a fight or flight reflex down my spine. I closed up my diary to slowly get up. I crept close towards the airlock door. My fist clenched at my side. Had I imagined it? Was I starting to lose it up here? These thoughts were cut by the sound of a loud alarm.
Stasis interrupted. Evacuate. 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 Evacuate.
I silenced the monitor with a heavy breath leaving me. I couldn't understand the code, but there were alarm indicators going off at every angle of that building next to me. That much I could make out. That wasn't possible. I had just seen it this morning when I went out for my jog. Maybe it was just an error. They did tell me these things happened. Maybe it was a test and they were just trying to keep me on my toes. This line of thought was taken away by another loud knock on the airlock door. It was so forceful. How could somebody be knocking on my door without a suit? Was it a machine? Or was it? No, it had to be my imagination. I pulled on my suit and pulled open the airlock to answer my messenger. I gazed outside to see the endless hills of moon dust, stars, and darkness. I couldn't make anything out, but the rays of sun briefly cast over the surface, and I saw a figure, a shape, a man. He was just standing out there, maybe 200 meters away, looking at me. We both stared at one another until it started to walk towards me, and I immediately shut the airlock door and sunk to the floor. I don't normally panic or start dry heaving, but I did. Now I know it wasn't my imagination, but calling to tell NASA would reveal that I had not followed protocol. But how could I? My escape pod was literally right near where the figure was standing. I could wait. I couldn't tell, but maybe he did have a suit on and just needed oxygen. Yeah, that's right. I could just wait him out, but then guilt creeped in. What if it was someone like me over there, just living in a pod to keep an eye on me? Maybe this was some sort of social experiment by NASA. Yeah, that could be it. I went to my computer console and opened up a call to NASA to get some answers on what to do.
Recorded call to NASA from Moonpod 1. Hello? Is anybody there? Listen, I heard a knock on the airlock door. I opened it. There was a person standing out there. I need to know what is happening, what is going on, because the alarms are going off for stasis interrupted, and there's a person up here. What have you not been telling me?
You might just be imagining things. There is not another man out there. You need to get to your escape pod if this stasis interrupted. I'm not sure why you haven't done that already.
No. There is a person out there, and he banged on the... Did you just hear that? He just did it again. Okay? Listen, I know there is somebody out there. I am not alone on this moon, okay? What is going on? I am fucking petrified. Please, I need you to tell me what is happening.
It is far too late. All right. This is what's going on. You were brought up there for a purpose, to keep an eye on, well, an experiment. Human experiment. We've been doing it for years, but we couldn't do it safely here on Earth. There would be too much collateral damage.
Human experiment. You telling me that there's a man out there that can breathe in space, and you locked him up here with me, and now he's violently banging on the door for like what? He wants to come inside for tea? He wants to watch the game? He wants to have dinner with me? He wants to screw me? What okay. Listen, okay, I'm okay. Listen, well, okay, all right, okay, here's what's gonna go on, okay? You need to tell me what I need to do at this point in time. Okay? I don't know what that thing is. I don't know what you guys did. At this point, all sense of curiosity is gone. Okay? Now I'm in needing to get to my escape pod, but every time I open the door, he's doing ding dong DoorDash, and he's standing right by it. Is he dangerous? Is he going to hurt me? What do I do?
I'm sorry, but it is far too late. He is far too dangerous. If he's not letting you escape, you are going to have to weigh him out. But unfortunately, there's nothing you can do. He is absolutely dangerous. I'm sorry, but this is the last time we'll speak. I'm ending this call now. I'm sorry, but you need to escape, or there's nothing I can do.
Wait. No. No. Oh, no. Oh, no. Don't you hang up. Oh, my God.
The end of that call gave me a sense of hopelessness. Instead of getting it together and making a break for the pod, I just sat there on the floor. The stars and the silence of beauty could do nothing to erase my lack of hope. I thought about the last 3 months my wife was alive, watching her crumble in my hands and fade away to the dust of time. And the cosmos was something I couldn't control. If I could ask for one thing, it would be to reach out to the endless void of space and hear her voice just one more time. To ask her what to do, or if there was truly a world beyond ours when we die. Then my hope came back for just a fleeting moment. She told me that I would make it, that I would keep going, but I just had to keep myself together. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put on my suit and make a break for my pod. I stumbled a bit when I got up, my nerves racking my body. I could barely breathe, much less muster the strength I needed to get my suit on. When I opened the airlock, there he was. If I could speak in space, I would ask so many questions, but I didn't. I saw the small building where my escape pod was, and I sucked in a breath. I looked over at the older building right next to mine, and I saw that it was nothing but debris scattered about the lunar surface. I looked to the figure again, then to my pod. I let the thoughts of my wife carry me into a sprint. The gravity not helping, but the figure also sprinted towards me, the gravity not affecting him. The sense of fear increasing with every step, my blood going cold with shimmering anxiety. I then saw an object whip past my head. It was a massive boulder that barely just missed me. When I looked back, the dark figure was holding another boulder with superhuman strength, and he threw it at me with a force that defied gravity. I dropped to the ground to avoid it, and it crashed on the lunar surface so very close to me. Particles floated at a quick speed that threatened to break my visor. I started to breathe hard. My oxygen was depleting fast because I had not thought to refill it after my morning jog. The figure was getting closer now. He was coming for me. I pulled myself up and turned to face it. I wanted to look. If I was going to die, I wanted to see the face of the being that would do it. When it got a little closer, its features were non-existent. Just a shadow. A void of pure blackness with no detail. It was like he was a shadow figure emerging from the dark and into the light. I took this as my cue to run. I bolted towards my escape pod, but the figure didn't follow. It just stood there. When I got to my escape pod, I strapped in. It wanted me to do the startup protocol, but I said screw that and just hit the accelerator. It was difficult to control. I had only done it once in a simulation, but I managed to get it up off the lunar surface to start heading back to Earth. The autopilot kicked in as I breathed a sigh of relief. I could see the very distant shape of the Earth and my anxieties calmed. In just a couple days, I would be home. But then, I saw a red beam. 2 of them fly by my pod. It traveled faster than I have ever seen anything go. My pod alarms were ringing as I looked in the rear camera to see the beams were coming from the dark figure. His eyes. The beams traveled all the way to that distant shape of Earth, and then I saw nothing. It was gone. And I was speechless. The world was there for one moment, and the next it was everyone, everything. My communications to NASA disconnected. My GPS autopilot stopped. There was no longer a signal. Eventually, I just turned off the engine and just
drifted. I thought I might start crying, especially as the figure jumped from the lunar surface and into the void of space to never be seen again. Instead, I started to laugh, but then I cried. Then I fell silent, drifting along the stars into a certain end, but an uncertain journey.
Well, this is my final diary, I guess. There's no home to go back to. It's gone. I'm no longer on the moon. I'm in this pod, escape pod, just going for a cruise. And I remember me and my wife used to go on cruises all the time. We would just get in the car and drive. We would just drive for forever and listen to music, things like Billy Joel and something of that sort, I guess. I used to have this neighbor after she died that had this annoying dog. I remember talking about that, but I doubt anybody who's gonna find this is gonna know what I'm talking about. He used to bark all the time and try to bite me when I walked by, but honestly, I always told myself coming to the moon was my best escape for people. That I no longer had to think about people ever again, because I just always told myself that I didn't like people. But instead I realize now that I always stood outside to watch these people because they were my light. My neighborhood, the annoying dog, the guy who brought me my mail. The darkness was inside my home because I had nothing in there. I was lost. And now there's only darkness. There's no more light. The figure damaged my pod and I'm running out of oxygen really fast. Something hit me and I guess it's draining out into space now. Whoever finds this, if you find this, if you can even understand my language, if you're an alien or whatever, I just want you to know that there's more than escapism in life, and I well, this is it for me. I'm a human being. I'm from a planet that no longer exists, but that's all right. I'm going out with the most beautiful view I could imagine. I guess this is it. If you find this, know that I at least tried to get back home.